Daniel stood in the great alien hall, the air heavy with the smell of strange flowers and burning crystal incense. He had fought in battles no human had ever seen, crossing alien deserts, facing creatures bigger than starships. The war was over now, and he had returned to the alien capital as a hero. Hundreds of alien eyes watched him from the tall glass balconies, their skin glowing faintly under the light. The alien ruler, a tall figure with silver skin and golden robes, stepped forward, smiling with a mouth full of sharp teeth. "You have served well, human," the ruler said, his voice deep and echoing in the hall. "As a token of our gratitude, we give you this." Two guards stepped out from behind the throne, dragging someone between them. Daniel's breath caught when he saw her. It was a woman, but not human, her skin a soft silver blue, her hair like strands of glowing light. Her wrists were bound with heavy black chains, and her ankles too. Her head was bowed, but he could feel her eyes on him, sharp, guarded, and unreadable. "This is Lyra," the ruler announced. "She is yours now, to command as you wish." The hall echoed with murmurs, some alien faces showing amusement, others jealousy. Daniel froze, unsure how to respond. He had expected metals, maybe land, or at least a ship, but a person? A chained woman as a prize. Every instinct in him told him this was wrong. The ruler's smile widened. "Do you refuse our gift, human?" Dozens of alien guards shifted, their hands close to their weapons. Daniel looked at Lyra again, at the way she kept her chin high, even with the chains. Her eyes flicked up for a brief moment. There was no plea in them, only fire. She wasn't broken, even if they wanted her to be. "I accept," Daniel said finally, but his voice was flat. The ruler clapped his hands, and the chains clinked as the guards pushed Lyra toward him. She didn't stumble. She walked with a strange grace, even in captivity. When she reached him, she stood still, her gaze meeting his, up close. Daniel could see the faint glow in her pupils, like two tiny stars trapped in her eyes. He felt the weight of the hall's stairs, the unspoken expectation that he would treat her as property. But deep inside, Daniel had already made a silent decision. He would not. The ceremony ended quickly after that, the ruler returning to his throne. Daniel was led away, Lyra walking beside him in silence, the chain between her wrists clinking softly, outside the grand hall. The alien streets stretched wide and strange, full of colors and lights that no human city had ever known. He guided her toward the small quarters given to him, not speaking until they were inside. The room was quiet, the only sound the hum of the air system. "You can sit," Daniel said gently. Lyra didn't move, just stared at him with narrowed eyes. "You're not like the others," she said suddenly, her voice low and melodic. Daniel shook his head. "I don't take slaves." Her brow lifted slightly, but there was still no trust in her expression. He walked closer slowly until he could reach the lock on her chains. "Do you want these off?" he asked, her lips parted. But she didn't answer. Her eyes flicked toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. Daniel leaned in, whispering, "I'm not going to hurt you." After a pause, she gave the smallest nod. The lock was alien-made, heavy and complex, but Daniel had learned a few tricks during the war. Within minutes, the chains fell away, clattering onto the floor. Lyra flexed her wrists. The marks read where the metal had bitten into her skin. She looked at him as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Why?" she asked. Daniel met her gaze. "Because no one should live in chains." For a moment, something softened in her eyes, but it was gone just as quickly. "You have no idea what you've done," she whispered. Her words sent a chill through him. Before he could ask what she meant, there was a loud knock at the door. The sound was sharp and commanding, the kind that didn't wait for permission to enter. Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's them." Daniel stepped toward the door, his hand hovering near the weapon on his belt. The knock came again, harder this time, and a deep alien voice growled, "Open, human." Daniel glanced at Lyra, and for the first time, He saw something other than defiance in her fear. Whatever he had just stepped into, it was far bigger than a reward ceremony. And Daniel knew, in that moment, his life had just changed forever. Daniel's hand stayed on the weapon at his side as the pounding on the door grew louder. Lyra stood frozen, her silver-blue skin seeming paler under the dim room lights. Her eyes darted toward the small back exit, but she didn't move. Human. The alien voice barked again from outside. We know she is unbound open now. Daniel's mind raced. The chains lay in a heap on the floor, proof of what he had done. If they saw this, he wouldn't just lose his reward, he might lose his head. He looked at Lyra and whispered, "Do you trust me?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, then she gave a small nod. He moved quickly, grabbing the chains and stuffing them into a storage compartment by the wall. Then he stepped back, motioning for Lyra to stand behind him. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing two tall alien guards in black armor. Their eyes glowed faintly red, scanning the room like predators. "Where are her restraints?" one of them demanded. Daniel kept his expression calm. "I removed them to clean her wounds." The guards exchanged a look, clearly not pleased. "Slaves are not to be unbound without permission," the second one said, his voice sharp. Daniel stepped closer, his tone steady. "She's injured. Would you prefer she dies before she can be useful to your council?" It was a gamble, but the guards didn't push further. One of them gave a warning glare. "You have been given a valuable prize, mistreat her, and you answer to us." Then they turned and left, the door sealing behind them. Daniel let out a slow breath, his pulse still racing. Lyra stepped forward from the shadows, her voice low. "You lied to them for me." Daniel looked at her. "I told them what they needed to hear." She studied him, as if trying to understand what kind of man he was. "You could have handed me over," she said. "Most humans would. I'm not most humans." Daniel replied simply. He walked over to the small table and poured 2 cups of water from the alien dispenser. She took the cup but didn't drink immediately, still watching him like he was an unsolved riddle. Finally, she said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" Daniel shook his head. "I know you're not just some slave they found on the street." She set the cup down, her fingers tracing the rim slowly. "I was Lyra Valen, first speaker of the Valari Union," she said, her voice calm but heavy. With meaning. Daniel frowned. "First speaker, you mean a leader?" "Yes," she said, "until I was betrayed by my own council, accused of crimes I didn't commit, stripped of my rank, and given to the humans as a political gesture." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. "So you're saying this is all some kind of show?" Her eyes hardened. "It's more than a show, it's humiliation, designed to remind me every day of what I've lost." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And you just accept that?" "I survive," she said quietly. "That is all I can do for now." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of alien machinery outside. Daniel's mind was already moving, if what she said was true. Then freeing her wasn't just an act of kindness, it was an act of rebellion. And if the alien rulers found out, both of them would be marked for death. "I'm not letting them keep you like this," Daniel said finally. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "You speak like you have a choice." "I've made my choice," he replied. "And I'm going to see it through." That night, while the city outside pulsed with alien lights, Daniel worked. He found a long cloak in the storage unit, one that could hide her distinctive glow. He also managed to override the room's security cameras for short bursts, giving them moments of privacy. Lyra watched him work, her expression unreadable. "Why risk yourself for me?" she asked at last. Daniel didn't look up. "Because I've seen too many people in chains, and I'm tired of it." She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. "I was taught that humans were selfish," she said softly, "that they took what they wanted and cared for nothing else." Daniel smirked faintly. "Guess you met the wrong human." Hours later, as the alien moons rose, the plan began. Daniel slipped the cloak over her shoulders and handed her a small device. "This will block their trackers for a short time," he explained. Lyra's fingers brushed against his as she took it. Her touch cool and almost electric, they moved through the quiet back corridors of the alien quarters, avoiding the main streets. Every step felt heavier than the last, each shadow a possible threat. Daniel kept glancing over his shoulder, but Lyra's movements were quick and precise. She was no helpless prisoner. She moved like someone who had walked in danger before. They were almost at the edge of the residential district when a deep mechanical voice spoke from behind them. "Halt!" Daniel turned slowly to see a patrol drone hovering just meters away. Red lights flashing. Lyra's eyes widened, and Daniel could see the same fire in them he had noticed the first time they met. She didn't wait for him to act. Her hand shot out, and a sudden burst of blue light pulsed from her palm. The drone sparked and fell to the ground. Silent, Daniel stared at her, stunned. "I thought you said you had no power," he whispered. Lyra's gaze was steady. "I said I had no freedom, not the same thing." Before he could respond, more lights flared in the distance. "They're coming," she said sharply, and for the first time, Daniel realized that freeing her had started something he might not be able to stop. Daniel and Lyra ran through the narrow side streets, the alien city glowing in strange colors around them. The sound of pursuing drones echoed from behind, their engines sharp and relentless. Daniel led her through a twisting path, ducking under low arches and past shops that were closing for the night. Every step felt like time was running out. Finally, they reached a dark alley where the glow of the city lights couldn't reach. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes scanning every shadow. "They won't give up," she said quietly. "You've defied them in front of the council." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "You're the one they're after." "Not me," she shook her head. "No, now they're after both of us." A faint hum made Daniel's skin prickle. He looked up to see a small floating sphere above them, a surveillance eye. Before he could react, Lyra's hand flicked upward, sending another burst of blue light into the machine. It fell with a soft thud, smoke curling from its shell. Daniel glanced at her. "That's the second time you've done that. What exactly are you?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the narrow end of the alley. Then she turned to him, her voice low. "You think I was just a politician, but there's more." Daniel waited, sensing that whatever she was about to say had been buried for a long time. "In my people's culture," she began, "leaders are trained in more than words. They are trained in the old arts. The ones forbidden now." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Old arts?" "Energy manipulation," she said. "It is in our blood, but most have forgotten how to use it. I did not." She lifted her hand slightly, and Daniel felt a faint warmth radiating from her palm. "It's why they fear me," she continued, "and why they will never allow me to be free." Daniel crossed his arms. "If you're that dangerous to them, why didn't you just escape?" Her expression darkened. "Because they hold something over me." She hesitated, then took a step closer, her voice dropping even lower. "They have my sister." Daniel felt the weight of those words hit him. Lyra went on. "When they took my power, they took her. She is young, barely grown, and they promised she would live only if I obeyed." Her eyes glistened under the faint light, though her voice stayed steady. "They made me watch her through the council's chambers, chained like I was, reminding me every day what would happen if I resisted." Daniel clenched his fists, anger stirring in his chest. "So all this time you've been their prisoner, because they're using her against you?" "Yes," Lyra said simply. "And now that you've freed me, they will punish her first to break me again." The thought made Daniel's jaw tighten. "Then we'll get her back," he said firmly. Lyra's gaze searched his face, as if weighing whether he was foolish or sincere. "You don't know what you're promising, human," she warned. "The prison she's in is not a place you can just walk into. It is the Citadel of Glass." Daniel had heard of it during the war, a fortress that floated above the alien capital. Held aloft by engines older than any known civilization, it was said to be impossible to enter, with walls that could sense intruders before they touched the gates. But the way Lyra's voice trembled when speaking of it told him there was no choice. "We'll find a way," he said again, this time quieter but no less certain. Lyra stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. "I have a map, but it's hidden. Getting it will be dangerous." "Danger is already here," Daniel replied, motioning toward the distant sound of approaching patrols. They slipped deeper into the maze of streets, heading toward the old quarter of the city. The buildings here were different, taller, darker, their surfaces marked with alien symbols that glowed faintly. Lyra stopped in front of a narrow door that looked abandoned. "This was one of my safe houses," she said. Pushing the door open, inside, the air was still and cold, dust motes floating in the dim light. She moved to a hidden panel in the wall and pressed her hand against it. With a faint hum, the panel slid aside, revealing a small metallic cube. "This is the map," she said, lifting it carefully. "But it is also something else, proof that I am innocent." Daniel stepped closer. "Proof?" "Yes," Lyra said. "The real crime I was accused of was conspiring with humans. But the truth is, I was working to make peace. This device holds recordings of secret meetings, agreements that could have ended the war without more blood." Her voice hardened. But peace was not what the council wanted. They wanted control. Daniel felt the pieces falling into place. "They made you the enemy so they could keep their power," he said. She nodded once. "And now with you. Here, they will spin another story, how I corrupted a human hero to betray his people." Before Daniel could respond, a sudden crash echoed from outside. Both of them turned toward the door. Shadows moved past the small window, and the metallic sound of alien boots striking the ground filled the air. "They found us," Daniel said, already drawing his weapon. Lyra closed her hand around the cube and slipped it into her cloak. Her eyes met his, and this time, there was no mistrust, only resolve. "Then we fight," she said, her voice like steel. The door shuddered under the force of the first blow. Daniel's pulse quickened, and he knew whatever was about to happen next would decide more than just their fate. It could decide the fate of her sister, and maybe even the future between their two peoples. The door buckled under the second blow. Dust fell from the ceiling as Daniel and Lyra backed away from it. The air felt heavier, charged with the tension of what was coming. Outside, alien voices shouted orders, their tones sharp and urgent. Daniel raised his weapon, the barrel aimed at the door. Lyra stood beside him, her hands glowing faintly with blue light. "They'll try to take us alive," she whispered. "But if they can't, they'll kill us both." Daniel gave a small nod. "Then we don't give them the choice." The third blow sent the door flying inward. 3 armored alien soldiers stormed into the room, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Daniel fired first, the sharp crack of his shots echoing off the walls. One soldier fell, sparks flying from his armor. The others pressed forward, their weapons raised. Lyra moved like liquid light, her hands sending bursts of blue energy into the attackers. One was thrown back into the wall with a metallic crunch. The last soldier tried to grab her, but Daniel was already there, slamming the butt of his weapon into the alien's helmet. The soldier dropped, and the room fell silent except for Daniel's heavy breathing. "They'll send more," Lyra said, her eyes scanning the doorway. Daniel stepped over the fallen soldiers, checking the street outside. The night air was cold, and the alien city stretched ahead of them like a maze of danger. "We can't stay here," he said. "We need to disappear before reinforcements arrive." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They slipped out into the shadows, moving quickly but keeping to the narrowest streets. Daniel could feel the tension in every step. They were hunted now, and the hunters were closing in. He kept glancing at Lyra, noticing how she navigated the city with the ease of someone who knew every corner. "Where are we going?" he asked quietly. "To the edge of the city," she replied. "Beyond that is the wasteland. No patrols, no laws, only survival." Daniel frowned. "Sounds inviting." It's better than being dead, she said flatly. They moved through. Markets shutting down for the night. Stalls closed quickly as merchants caught sight of Lyra, their eyes widening before they turned away. Daniel noticed the fear in their reactions. It wasn't just him she was hiding from. They all know you, he murmured. Yes, she said without looking at him. And they know what happens to those who help me. Hours later, they reached the outer gates. 2 massive alien guards stood watch, their weapons glowing faintly. A cargo caravan was preparing to leave through the gates, its transports loaded with supplies. Lyra's eyes narrowed. We'll slip out with them, Daniel followed her lead, moving between the shadows of the cargo containers. The low hum of engines masked their footsteps. They climbed into the back of one transport, hiding behind crates of sealed metal canisters. The caravan began to move, the gates opening with a slow grinding sound. Daniel felt a small rush of relief as the city walls faded behind them. The wasteland stretched out like an endless ocean of dust and jagged rock. The twin alien moons hung low, casting long shadows across the barren ground. Daniel broke the silence. So, now we're fugitives in the middle of nowhere. Lyra's lips curved faintly. Better than being prisoners. As the caravan rolled deeper into the wasteland, Daniel finally let himself relax for a moment, but his thoughts kept circling back to the map cube she carried. It wasn't just a way to her sister, it was proof of her innocence. If they could get that proof to the right people, everything could change. The caravan stopped hours later at a small outpost made of metal, scraps and old ship parts. Daniel and Lyra slipped away before the crew noticed them missing. They found shelter in an abandoned building, its walls cracked and its roof half gone. Lyra sat on a broken crate, pulling her cloak tighter around her. You've done more for me than anyone since my capture, she said quietly. Daniel shrugged. Doesn't feel like enough. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You fight like someone who's lost before, she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. I've lost plenty. Then you understand why I can't stop, she replied, her voice almost a whisper. A distant rumble interrupted them. Daniel moved to the doorway, scanning the horizon. A swarm of dust was rising in the distance, moving fast. Lyra joined him, her eyes narrowing. Patrol bikes, she said. They've tracked us. Daniel's pulse quickened. How? They can trace energy bursts, and I used my power earlier, she admitted. Before he could reply, the roar of engines grew louder. The patrol was closing in, their lights cutting through the darkness. Daniel grabbed his weapon and looked at Lyra. We can't outrun them, he said. Her eyes met his, glowing faintly under the moons. Then we fight again together. The first patrol bikes broke through the dust cloud, their riders aiming energy rifles. Daniel fired, his shots sparking against the alien armor. Lyra moved beside him, her hands flaring with blue light. The night lit up with flashes of gunfire and energy bursts, the air thick with heat and dust. For a moment, it felt like they were back on the battlefield. Every movement was in sync. When Daniel took cover, Lyra struck. When she was cornered, he drew fire away. The last patrol bike fell in a burst of sparks, its rider rolling into the dust. The silence that followed was almost shocking. Daniel lowered his weapon, glancing at Lyra. That makes us even, he said with a faint grin. She shook her head. Not even just closer. They stood there for a moment under the twin moons, both breathing hard. Neither of them said it aloud, but something had shifted between them. They were no longer just a fugitive and her reluctant protector. Now, they were partners in survival, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The wasteland was quiet again, but Daniel knew it wouldn't last. They had destroyed a patrol, and that meant the aliens would send more, bigger, faster, and deadlier. Lyra stood beside him, the faint blue glow still fading from her hands. You fought well, she said softly. Like someone who has done this too many times. Daniel gave a short nod. War teaches you quick, or you don't live long enough to learn. They moved from the open ground toward the cover of rocky cliffs. The night wind carried a dry metallic taste. the air thin and cold. Daniel's mind kept going back to the citadel of glass, the place where Lyra's sister was held. Every step they took now was bringing them closer to that fortress, but also closer to the moment when there would be no turning back. As dawn began to touch the horizon, they found a hidden cave in the cliffside. Inside, the air was cooler, shadows stretching deep into the stone. Daniel lit a small flare, setting it on a rock to give them light. Lyra unfastened her cloak, revealing the map cube hidden beneath the folds of fabric. "This is it," she said, placing it between them. Daniel crouched down, watching as she activated it. A soft hum filled the air, and a glowing three-dimensional map appeared above the cube. The citadel floated at the center, a shining crystal fortress surrounded by defensive towers. "There," she pointed. "That's the service entry for supply ships, if we can reach it. We might have a chance to get inside." Daniel studied the map carefully. "It's heavily guarded," he said. "We'll need a distraction to pull their focus." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "I can give them one." He looked at her sharply. "You mean your power?" "Yes," she said, "but if I use it at full strength, they'll know it's me, and they'll throw everything they have at us." Daniel frowned. "That's suicide." "It's survival," she replied calmly. "Not for me, but for my sister." He held her gaze for a moment, then shook his head. "We're not leaving without both of you." They spent the day in the cave, planning every step. Lyra explained the fortress layout, the guard rotations, and the way the citadel's defense systems reacted to threats. Daniel worked on modifying his weapon to overload its energy core. Risky move, but one that could blow through the outer gates if needed. By nightfall, they were ready. They left the cave under the cover of darkness. Crossing the wasteland in silence, the citadel loomed in the distance, its walls catching the moonlight and shining like glass underwater. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. This was it, the point where their lives could end in minutes or change forever. As they neared the supply docks, Lyra moved ahead, her steps light and silent. She turned to him briefly. "Once I start, there's no going back. Are you sure?" Daniel's answer was simple. "Always." Lyra closed her eyes, her hands slowly lifting as the air around her began to vibrate. A faint hum turned into a low, building roar, and blue light surged from her palms. It spread out in a wave, crackling through the air and lighting up the night. The citadel's outer defenses flared to life. Instantly, sirens wailed. Lights swept across the wasteland, and guard towers rotated toward her position. Daniel used the chaos to sprint toward the service entry. Energy blasts scorched the ground near him, but he kept moving, sliding into the shadow of a supply ship. He found the access panel and began working to override the lock. Behind him, Lyra unleashed a storm of light, drawing the attention of every guard in sight. The door to the supply bay hissed open, and Daniel slipped inside. He moved quickly through the narrow corridors. Following the map burned into his mind. The prison wing was cold and dim, the air filled with the faint hum of energy barriers. He passed row after row of cells until he saw her Lyra's sister, smaller and younger, her silver-blue skin pale under the harsh lights. Daniel moved to the control panel, overriding the lock. The energy field flickered and vanished, and she stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "A friend of your sister," Daniel said quickly. "We need to go now." They moved back through the corridors, the sounds of fighting growing louder outside. When they reached the service bay, Lyra was already there, her breathing heavy, her hands still glowing faintly. The moment she saw her sister, something in her face broke, the mask of strength giving way to pure relief. They embraced quickly, but the reunion lasted only seconds before the alarm shifted tone. "They've sealed the main gates," Daniel said. "We need another way out." Lyra's eyes flicked toward a maintenance lift on the far side of the bay. "It leads to the outer loading platforms," she said. "From there, we can jump into the river below." Daniel didn't hesitate. They ran for the lift, the sound of alien soldiers closing in behind them, The lift rose slowly, too slowly, and Daniel fired back down the shaft, keeping their pursuers pinned. When they reached the top, the cold night air hit them like a wave. The river roared below, black and fast-moving under the moonlight. Daniel looked at Lyra. Ready? She gave a faint smile. Always, they jumped, the wind tearing past them, and hit the icy water hard. The current pulled them away from the citadel, the fortress lights fading into the distance. Daniel surfaced, gasping for air, with Lyra and her sister beside him. For the first time since this began, they were free, at least for now. The river carried them far from the citadel before they managed to reach the shore. Daniel pulled himself onto the muddy bank, his muscles aching from the cold and the current. Lyra came next, helping her younger sister out of the water. The girl shivered, her silver-blue skin turning pale under the moonlight. "We can't stay here," Lyra said quickly, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "They'll send search teams upriver." Daniel nodded, scanning the dark hills ahead. There was no light, no sign of life, only the sound of the river fading behind them. They began walking toward the shelter of a rocky ridge, their wet clothes clinging to their bodies. The cold bit deep, but none of them spoke for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finally reached a sheltered spot between two large boulders, Daniel started a small fire with the emergency kit he carried. The faint warmth was a relief, and for the first time since the escape, Lyra's sister spoke. "My name is Ilara," she said softly. "Lyra told me about humans, but I never thought I'd meet one." Daniel gave a small smile. "I'm not like most humans." "No," Lyra said quietly, "you're not." They sat in silence for a moment, the flames casting long shadows on the rocks. Daniel finally broke it. "You have your sister, now what's next?" Lyra's gaze didn't waver. "Next we end this," Daniel frowned. "And what?" "The council," she said firmly. "The ones who chained me, who held my sister hostage, who started a war just to keep their power." Ilara looked at her in shock. "Lyra, you can't." "I can," Lyra interrupted, "and I will." Daniel studied her expression. There was no hesitation there, but the weight of her words pressed against his mind. Taking down the council meant going back to the heart of alien power. It meant facing more enemies than they could count. You want to walk right back into the capital where every soldier in the city is hunting you? Daniel asked. Lyra met his eyes. "Yes, that's suicide," he said bluntly. "Maybe," she admitted, "but if we keep running, they'll never stop hunting us. Our only chance is to expose them." Ilara's voice trembled. "What if they kill you?" Lyra's hand rested gently on her sister's shoulder. "Then you live free. That's worth the risk." Daniel leaned back against the rock, the firelight flickering across his face. He had been a soldier long enough to know the odds. What Lyra was suggesting was madness. But he also knew what it felt like to be hunted, to have no choice but to fight. And deep down, he knew he couldn't walk away. He sighed. "If we do this, we'll need more than a plan. We'll need allies." Lyra's lips curved faintly. "I know people, those who still believe in what I stood for." "And where are they?" Daniel asked. "In hiding," she replied. "But they will come if they know I'm alive." They traveled for 2 days across barren land, avoiding patrols and keeping to rocky paths. The food was scarce, the nights bitter cold, but Lyra never faltered, leading them with the certainty of someone who knew every shadow and shortcut. On the 3rd night, they reached a hidden canyon where the walls rose high and narrow. At the far end, a faint light glowed from inside a cave. When they stepped inside, Daniel saw a small group of aliens, their faces tense but their eyes lighting up when they saw Lyra. "First speaker," one of them whispered. Bowing his head, Daniel caught the way Lyra straightened at the title. It wasn't arrogance, it was the return of a part of herself they had tried to take away. They gathered around a rough stone table. Lyra placed the map cube on it, activating the holographic display. "This is proof of the Council's crimes," she said. "If we broadcast it to the people, their power will crumble." One of the rebels shook his head. The broadcast towers are deep in the capital, heavily guarded. Daniel leaned forward. Then we hit them hard and fast before they can shut it down. They spent the night making a plan. Lyra's rebels would cause chaos in the streets, drawing soldiers away from the tower. Daniel, Lyra, and Alara would slip inside with the cube and transmit the recordings. Once the truth was out, the council would have nowhere to hide. By dawn, the plan was set. Daniel checked his weapon, feeling the old familiar tension before a mission. Lyra stood beside him, her cloak pulled tight, her eyes fixed on the rising. "Son, you don't have to come with me," she said quietly. Daniel smirked. "I think we've established that I'm not leaving you." They moved out with the rebels, the city walls growing larger in the distance. Smoke was already rising from the outer districts as the diversion began. Daniel could hear the distant shouts of soldiers and the echo of energy blasts. The streets ahead were chaos-perfect cover for their approach. They slipped through alleyways, keeping low. Alara stayed close to Lyra, her small frame hidden under a hooded cloak. Daniel's heart pounded as the broadcast tower came into view, its spire cutting into the sky. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. But as they approached the final street, a shadow fell across them. Daniel looked up to see a towering alien enforcer step into their path. His armor was black as obsidian, his weapon twice the size of Daniel's. "You will not pass," the enforcer growled. The street behind them was already closing with soldiers. They were trapped. And Daniel knew the choice was no longer just dangerous, it was life or death. The alien enforcer stepped closer, each heavy footfall echoing off the walls of the narrow street. His black armor reflected the glow of nearby fires, and the hum of his weapon filled the air with a low, deadly warning. Daniel tightened his grip. On his rifle, his stance firm, Lyra stepped forward slightly, placing herself between the enforcer and her sister. "They'll have to go through me," she said. Her voice calm but edged with steel. The enforcer tilted his head, a faint glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "First speaker Lyra," he said slowly. "You should have stayed in your chains." Blue light began to flicker in Lyra's hands, growing brighter with each heartbeat. Daniel knew what was coming. He had seen her unleash her full strength once before. He also knew that if she did it here, it might be the last thing she ever did. "Lyra, wait," he said quickly. "We do this together." The enforcer moved. First, swinging his weapon up to fire, Daniel dropped to one knee and shot, his blast striking the weapon's emitter and sending sparks flying. Lyra followed instantly, releasing a wave of energy that slammed into the enforcer, knocking him back into the wall. The ground trembled under the force, dust and debris raining down from above. Before the enforcer could recover, Daniel charged forward, tackling him into the wall. The impact cracked the surface, and Daniel wrestled to keep the alien's weapon aimed away from Lyra and Alara. The enforcer swung a heavy fist, striking Daniel's shoulder with bone-jarring force. Pain shot through him, but he didn't let go. Lyra joined him, her hands gripping the enforcer's helmet, sending another pulse of energy through the armor. The alien's body went rigid before collapsing to the ground. Breathing hard, Daniel turned to Lyra. "We move now before more come." They sprinted toward the broadcast tower, Alara keeping pace as best she could. The streets were chaos, fires burned. Rebels clashed with soldiers, and the night sky flashed with bursts of light. They reached the base of the tower, its metal walls humming with power. The entrance was locked, but Daniel set an explosive charge he had taken from a rebel fighter. The blast tore the doors open, the sound swallowed by the noise of the battle outside. Inside, the tower's central chamber rose high above them, filled with cables and glowing panels. "This is it," Lyra said, pulling the map cube from her cloak. She moved to the main console, her fingers flying over the alien controls. The screen lit up, showing the first images from the recording's secret meetings, council members plotting the war, and orders to frame Lyra as a traitor. Daniel stood guard at the door, firing at any soldier who tried to enter. "Almost there," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos. A final keystroke sent the data to every broadcast screen across the capital. In the streets, soldiers and citizens alike stopped to watch. As the truth unfolded, the council's lies burned away under the harsh light of proof. By the time the last recording ended, the city had changed. There was no going back. "They'll come for us now," Daniel warned. "They'll come for themselves first." Lyra replied, knowing the council would be too busy defending their own positions to chase them. She turned to Ilara, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You're free now," she whispered. Ilara's eyes shone with relief. "Because of you and him," she said, glancing at Daniel. The three of them slipped out of the tower before the next wave of fighting reached it. By the time dawn touched the city, the council's power was crumbling. Some fled, some were captured by their own people, and some tried to fight. But the tide had turned. The war they had started was ending. Not with more death, but with the truth. Weeks later, the capital was different. Lyra was no longer a prisoner, no longer a fugitive. She was a leader again. Though she refused the title of first speaker, Daniel stayed, helping to rebuild, working side by side with those who had once been enemies. Ilara began a new life, free of the chains that had bound her since childhood. One quiet evening, as the twin moons rose over the city, Daniel stood on a balcony, looking out at the rebuilt streets. Lyra joined him, her steps soft, her silver blue skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. "I never thanked you," she said, her voice gentle. "You don't have to," Daniel replied. "I do," she insisted. "You didn't just save me, you gave me my life back." They stood in silence for a moment, the cool night air wrapping around them. Then Lyra turned fully toward him, her gaze steady. "In my culture, we have a vow," she said. "It's given only once, and it means you belong with someone always." Daniel's brow lifted. "Sounds serious." "It is," she said softly. "And I want to give it to you." Daniel's heart pounded. But his answer was simple. "Then I give you mine too." The vow was not spoken in words. They simply placed their foreheads together, letting the moment speak for itself. In that quiet space, there were no chains, no wars, no walls between them, just two souls who had fought their way to freedom and found each other along the way. Weeks later, they were married in a small ceremony on the balcony where they had made their vow. It was not grand, but it was perfect. Humans and aliens stood together, united not by politics or treaties, but by choice. Lyra wore no crown. Daniel wore no uniform. They didn't need them. What they had was stronger than titles or symbols. From chains to vows, their journey had been written in fire and danger. But it ended in the light, and for the rest of their days, they would walk side by side, not as hero and prize, not as leader and rescuer, but as equals, bound by love.